The sanctions regime against North Korea, at least the UN sanctions, they still exist on paper, but enforcement of those sanctions has basically fallen apart because Russia and China are in some ways no longer sort of cooperating with large parts of the sanctions. Russia is actively sort of breaking the sanctions, and the reason we're even talking about this in the first place is because sort of in March, Russia vetoed the renewal of the panel of experts that was the panel at the UN that actually monitored the enforcement of the sanctions. So effectively, there's now no UN body that sort of publicizes and monitors how North Korean sanctions are enforced and how North Korea tries to get around those sanctions. If China and Russia are not actually enforcing the sanctions, it's easier for North Korea to ship those weapons sort of to Iran than it would have had before. It can now ship them directly through China or ship them through Russia, and no one will basically sort of pay attention to how they're getting there. I don't think that North Korea is necessarily shipping weapons directly to Hezbollah, but they sell them to Iran, and then Iran sends them to Hezbollah, usually by sort of plane or by ship. The thing to keep in mind is that North Korea has two motives in some sense for why they sell weapons, right? I mean, first, they obviously want to sell weapons to countries that are adversaries of the U.S. in some way, or adversaries of South Korea more indirectly. And this is a way to sort of encourage those sort of countries to be strengthened. But I think the larger reason is because they want to make money, right? And sort of weapons exports are not necessarily, or at least until recently, weren't necessarily a very safe way to make money for North Korea. But now, because of the lack of sanctions enforcement, they're increasingly safer, and sort of the supply of money is likely to be more stable. And in that environment, conditional on having money or having something to give North Korea, you can imagine that Iran might be interested in buying more weapons from North Korea. I think the limitation in that case would come down to what North Korea can actually produce for them, how fast they can produce it, and also what North Korea is willing or able to give them in terms of expertise. I mean, primarily in the past, what North Korea has largely provided Iran has been missile technology, missile training, sort of basically technological assistance, plus a combination of very simple basic sort of weapons and sort of equipment, which is what you saw end up in the hands of Hezbollah. Would North Korea be willing to sort of give them more sort of sophisticated technology, such as technology that would allow them to send their missiles farther, or send their missiles more accurately than what Iran has so far? I mean, I guess we'll see. But certainly not the kind of thing they would advertise. There's a lot of talk in the West about sort of this, what you might call this axis, Russia, China, North Korea. In some sense, neither North Korea nor China are necessarily interested in that framing, right? I mean, sort of North Korea has traditionally operated as, in some sense, a buffer state for both Russia and China. It sort of plays them off of each other to maximize its influence with both countries, to maximize the things it can get from both countries, and to minimize the leverage those countries have over North Korea. So North Korea can always say, oh, China, I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to go to Russia, right? And vice versa, right? So the idea that sort of they're all teaming up together actually would put North Korea at a disadvantage, right? North Korea would prefer to have its relationship separate in terms of Russia and with China. In the Middle East, things are a bit, I think, sort of iffier. North Korea has always, at least ideologically, had sort of made common cause with sort of the Palestinian groups. But it's always a faraway country. Sort of the actual sort of connections are minimal, and it doesn't necessarily have as much of a stake in the outcome as in Ukraine, and it doesn't open up as many possibilities. But if Iran wants to buy weapons, it'll sell weapons. If Iran wants to sell those, then send those weapons to Hezbollah and Hamas, that's no problem. That's certainly no problem for North Korea.